take on Beauregard, his major blunder is the night between. There basically is nothing done until they start hearing firing on the next morning, and then Beauregard starts thinking, okay, maybe something's going on here. In fact, it's kind of confusing. He hears firing over here. First of all, they hear it over to at the left. That's Pond. We're going to see that in a little bit. Lew Wallace attacking Pond and so on. And then he starts shifting troops over there. You know, let's go and see what's going on over here. And then he starts hearing firing over here. And then he starts hearing firing back here. They're firing off the wet guns to see if they're shooting. You know, and then he hears firing over here and all that. And his staff's around him, and he makes the comment that this is almost like playing one of Morse blind games. You ever heard that? Marco, you know, you're blind and you're reaching in the dark. And he makes the comment, I wish Morse was here to help me play it out. And so he starts mounting up, and you know what's going through Beauregard's mind at this point, I don't know, but he asked his staff sergeant. He said, take my pulse and the staff's pulse. I would like to know what our pulse is going into battle. And it's like 125 or something like that. So obviously he's a little worked up. What's normal pulse? 70 something or something like that. So he's a little worked up as he's going into battle. But he starts shifting troops first to the left and then into the line over here on the right. And I thought what we would do is just kind of cover the second day, and we're going to walk across the battlefield. It's probably a couple of miles or so, I guess, across there. We're not fully on the eastern side now. We're not going to go fully on the western side. But we'll walk the initial Confederate line, and I'll just kind of give you my thinking of what Beauregard is doing and what is happening here and how the thing is laid out. And it's good. I'm glad we ended here because we can start here because this is the secure flank, pretty much. Nothing really moves at this point because this is Chalmers and Jackson and some of those major units that are in line here, and we'll see more as we go on. Now the fighting will start as Nelson's division moves forward. Again, they're not hit at Dale Branch Ravine. Had the Confederates resisted at Dale Branch Ravine, I think it would have been a different story. But Nelson will move forward, and Chalmers' brigade, the Mississippians, are the ones that actually are a little bit forward. They're the only unit that's forward. They're the Pond on this side of the battlefield. Pond on the other side, of course, confronts Lew Wallace. But even here, Chalmers is not right up on the front line. He's basically Wicker Field area. And he will fight there a little bit, and I think we talked a little bit last year about Nelson's. We did do Nelson's division in the advance. And I think we talked about then that Chalmers has some artillery, but I haven't been able to definitively nail down whose artillery it is. Probably some of Robertson's battery. But Chalmers ultimately will fall back into the main line, which will be on this ridge, the Hamburg-Purdy line ridge. So we're going to walk up the Hamburg-Purdy road and basically just follow that down, and we'll talk about the incremental fighting. And I guess the basic story is, the thing that I want you to get out of this is that the Confederates will stop the Union advance all across the battlefield. Every single area where there's a Union advance, they will stop it cold in its tracks. These are fresh troops out of Buell's army. These are fresh troops, Lew Wallace's division, all of that, fresh troops, and the Confederates will stop it. And so, you know, why couldn't they have done that at Bill or Tillman if they had been prepared? But obviously they weren't prepared. We'll head on out. That way or either way. A whole lot of tablets today, but what we've done were the square tablets, the first day tablets. So we're going to be looking at the oval tablets. That's Chalmers' brigade. That's one of those new ones that's been replaced. And so we're kind of on the right flank of the Confederate Army here. Chalmers will turn his brigade over to Robert A. Smith, who the Irishman, the 10th Mississippi that we talked about. Chalmers will kind of take over a little bit larger section here. Hardee himself is over on this side. And it'll be Chalmers' brigade that will actually kind of get around Nelson's flank. And it'll be some pretty heavy fighting and actually drive Nelson back a little bit. Terrell's battery, the regular battery that comes forward, will also be threatened. I think Chalmers people will take a caisson or two, and I don't think they ever take a gun, but they have to retreat. They have to retire by prolong. Are you familiar with that? How they tie the rope to the gun and pull it back as they're loading it? You retreat and load the thing as it's falling back. And so Chalmers does threaten the Union flank, and that helps, of course, in stopping any advance that Nelson moves forward. So Nelson basically is stopped in his tracks, and we'll see more of the line as we proceed on down the Hamburg-Purdy road here.
probably about a good 5 or 7 programs that are decent.
Oh, okay.
Comparison with this thing, there's a bunch that kind of hand out masters and things like that, but no shot at actually getting the job stuff. But no, Florida has a good faculty and a good reputation in the field.
Texas Miner's a good place to do it. Are y'all native Texicans? Or?
He is, not me.
Okay, all right. Well, you're the spotlight here. You're front and center. This is second Texas, of course. On the second day, the second Texas is in the area. On the first day, a little bit farther to the right over there. This is the famous episode that John C. Moore gets into with Hardee as the Confederates on this flank. I've said a lot of times today, I'm wondering how to say this, I've said a lot of times today that sometimes there are things that we just don't know. And I have had a heck of a time trying to determine at times who attacks first and who counterattacks and all that. This is a wonderful example. When Nelson comes out into Sarah Bell's cotton field, we know they attack and are driven back, and we know that Moore, the 2nd Texas, and Hardee's right wing here will advance and will fall back. We've got accounts of all of that happening, but it's hard to reconcile exactly when it happens in sequence with each other. In terms of the Confederate attack here, and we'll kind of put this into larger context of what's going on the battlefield. I'm convinced that Beauregard on the morning of April the 7th is not just willing to say, okay, well, they got reinforcements, let's just fight a gradual fallback thing, we're just going to give up and go back to Corinth. I think he still thinks he can win, and I think he still is determined to advance and attack, and it plays into a little bit of what you were talking about a little bit ago. All of this about sweeping around the Union left flank is done now. When Beauregard issues his attack orders on the morning of April the 7th, and they're pretty detailed orders, and we get this from some staff officers, Robert Chisholm, for example, who is sent to Breckenridge to give these orders. Breckenridge, we'll talk more about him in a little bit, but he actually says, well, I don't think I can do this, and he has to ride back to Beauregard, and Beauregard says, yes, you can, you need to do this, and so on. The overall picture, though, is that Breckenridge in the center, we'll see his position in a little bit, basically where Ruggles Battery is today, is kind of going to be the hammer that's going to drive Grant and Buell into the river, just like Beauregard had planned to do the day before. So we're still thinking push them into the river instead of away from the river. And I always say, you know, it really doesn't make any difference whether you push them into the river or push them into the creek, as long as you do one or the other. If you come up that far short, it makes a big difference whether you push them to the river or to the creeks, you know, because they can have that much, you know, the gunboats and the line of defense and all that. If you come up even that much short, it's a world of difference. But if you actually achieve either one, it doesn't matter. You're going to destroy both armies. But Beauregard obviously is pushing toward the river, while Johnston was wanting to push him away from the river. The next morning, Beauregard does the same thing. He wants Breckenridge to sweep in, and we're going to see where the road curves right here. The Confederate line, and this is going to be key when we get up to McClung's battery, the Washington artillery and all that, the Confederate line is going to curve as well, and it's going to stretch up here from the Wheatfield area to Jones Field. We're going to cross country then again. So we got Hardee basically like this, and Breckenridge is kind of at an angle. So Breckenridge is going to be the hammer that's going to sweep forward. So Hardee is given orders to move forward kind of in echelon. Y'all know what echelon is, kind of stacked behind each other. And he's told to move forward, but be very, very careful that you don't fire into Breckenridge's troops who are going to be coming across your left front. Be very, very careful that you don't fire into them, and you're going to be the second line, essentially. So when Hardee and some of his folks move forward, and I still haven't been quite able to reconcile whether it's after Nelson attacks or before Nelson attacks, at some point you just got to take a stand and say, you know, that it happened this way, is the best that we can determine. But when they do advance, and I think for a lot of reasons Hardee is the initial advance, and then the Union forces counterattack and are driven back, and that's the way I present it in the book. But they're told they're going to be the second line, and this is when we get this famous episode that Moore and the 2nd Texas and a lot of them go forward, and staff officers are telling them do not fire because they're Confederates up there, and they're saying, well, they're dressed in blue. Well, that doesn't matter. They're Confederates out there, you know. And so they walk point blank range up to them, and Nelson's Union forces soldiers just fire point blank into them, you know. and the Confederates start to respond, and staff officers are still coming up to him. He tells one Texan, says, if you fire another shot, I'm going to blow your brains out, that kind of thing. And they said, well, I know they're Federals up there. You're crazy, staff officer. You know? So that's kind of some of the confusion they're working on here. This leads to the famous episode that Hardee says, well, actually, the politicians get involved. Anytime the politicians get involved, it all gets messed up, of course. But Confederate Senator Phelan gets involved, and Texas Senator Lewis Wigfall gets involved. And Hardee has to explain kind of what he's talking about, and he had called the Texans a pack of cowards because they wouldn't advance after this, wouldn't reform, and all that. And it comes out that this episode occurred with the Texans, but Hardee says no, it wasn't them, it was somebody else. So the episode did occur, and it's one of my favorite, but Hardee says that he was ridiculing apparently a line of battle and calling them cowards and all that, and the whole line of battle turned about-faced in line of battle. Hardee back there harping at them, you know. They turned about-faced in line of battle and fired a volley over Hardee's head. And Hardee said, I thought we were going to be riddled with balls, is what he said. And then they about-faced, turned back around, and started fighting again. That's a pretty good message to Hardee. You shut up, basically, and let us do our fighting. So that's quite an episode, but you can see vividly here, there is, most of the time we think of the second day of Shiloh as just the Union forces attacked and drove the Confederates back, but there is some tactical planning, particularly on the Confederate side. You know, we're going to attack and they're going to move in front of you and you're going to support that attack. All of it is still pushing toward Pittsburgh Landing. The goal of everything for Beauregard apparently is Pittsburgh Landing, so a good place to kind of talk about here. Any questions on?
Well, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about Beauregard when he wrote his report of the battle, and he kind of described it as a giant raid. You know, we're just going to push him away from the landing, get a few supplies, and we're going back to Corinth.
Yeah.
So when you look at what he did out here, that's not what
it's
he was
completely
trying to win
different.
the battle.
And he's still telling this to Van Dorn, you know, that we won a great victory, and right. He's telling Van Dorn, come on and we'll win again. And Van Dorn says, well, I need weapons, and you know, maybe I can have some of these weapons that you took in this great victory. And Beauregard has to say, well, I couldn't bring off all of them I took, so I had to leave some of them because there were so many of them, you know. So Beauregard's spinning it and making himself, you know, he would be a good pundit on TV these days. It's interesting to compare the veterans of the first day in the Confederate Army and what they do on the second day with the veterans of the first day on the Union side, the Army of the Tennessee. And we'll talk about them as we get over to their side. I think part of it may be that they realize, okay, we don't have to carry the whole weight, whereas on the Confederate side, this is all we got. We got to, we don't have any other choice. But I think they are so shell-shocked and just beaten down that they just don't fight nearly as good as their counterparts in the Confederate Army that had fought all day the day before as well. So, you know, I don't know exactly what it is. I know it's not because of a lack of manhood or courage, or, you know, the Union soldiers of the Army of the Tennessee were just as courageous and tough as Confederate soldiers, but there was something probably psychological going on there, you know, that the Confederates, this is all we got. So we got to step up and do this. Stop at McClung's battery here, interesting point. Again, if you look at the road, we had that first curve, but now we're kind of getting into a second curve as well, and all of it's kind of, I guess, one big curve, but you see the thing's going to curve again. And in effect, what you have at this position, when Nelson's division comes out into Cerebell's cotton field, and that's mainly Bruce's brigade with Amund's brigade on the other side fighting Chalmers and Smith and so on, McClung's battery is able to wheel around, and they're able to fire down the line to flank out, to flank that position. And Bruce's brigade really just takes a pounding in this, and that helps drive them back. Even more so, it's going to be the Washington Artillery. You see the Crescent Monument Regiment down there, but it's going to be even a little farther forward in Davis-Wheatfield, and they're going to be able to enfilade Nelson's division. Hazen's brigade is still in the woods. It is bent. It's flanked back. So they're able to rake the flank of Nelson's division, and that's what is going to get Nelson stirred up and so on, and cause Hazen to move forward and get that big fight in the wheat field here. But I think this is a great place. You know, you just angle these guns just a little bit, and you're firing down. You're firing almost from here straight there is Albert Sidney Johnston Monument. You know, you're firing directly across that field. So this is a good flanking position, even more so with the Washington Artillery up here. Fighting on the second day in Shiloh comes here in Davis Wheat Field for a couple of different reasons. Here we have the Washington artillery, and again, these placements of cannon and tablets and so on are a snapshot in time, and really probably the Washington artillery would be better marked farther up on the high ground out there in the field itself. There are basically two Confederate lines here, and if you look on the Reed map and elsewhere, you'll be able to delineate this. Number one, you have the extenuation of Hardee's line that includes the 19th Louisiana Crescent Regiment, and you go on down, you've got Washington. Yeah, here comes the car. He's moving on, too. Stewart's 13th Arkansas and 2nd Tennessee, Bates 2nd Tennessee up there. So this is kind of a reserve line. The front line is Breckenridge's corps. That's a male, man. As Breckenridge starts moving forward more like this, you've got him moving forward and kind of masking this front line, and is that right flank of Bowen's brigade. Bowen's been wounded by this point, of course. It's under John D. Martin. As Martin's brigade moves forward and the right flank is out in this field, this kind of becomes the second line, and the Washington artillery will move up a little bit more. But bear in mind this curvature of the road here. When the Washington artillery turns this way, they can just enfilade Nelson's division all day long, and Nelson really gets uptight about this, and that's what spurs some of this fighting that occurs in the Davis Wheat Field, as he sends Hazen's brigade, which has drawn back its right, in order to align basically with the Confederate line that is curving around this point. He'll send them in and portions of Crittenden's division as well. Suey Smith's brigade will come to the rescue. We talked about Nelson's division and the fighting here in the wheat field last year. Those of you that were here, we'll just kind of recap it a little bit. This year we came out from the opposite direction, of course. The heaviest fighting here is really because there's no good way to explain this, but I explain it kind of as a vortex of being caught in kind of the bowl of the Confederate line. From here on, the Confederate line is doing basically that. From here, just past the little crossroads up here, Harper's Battery, we're gonna take this line and move through the woods there. So that part of the line is kind of doing this. This part of the line is doing this. So you know, you got kind of a bowl in here, and when the Federals enter here, you can fire from here at them, you can fire from here at them, you can fire front at them, and so they get kind of caught in a vortex, if you will, as they move out in here. And of course, Hazen will endure more casualties than any other brigade in the Army of the Ohio here. He will lose more casualties at this point. So there's heavy fighting as he moves into Davis Wheat Field, and there's ample evidence. There's been some argument over you know, who attacks first and all that, but I think it's pretty standard known that as Breckenridge is moving forward, and we'll see the results of that over at the Hornet's Nest and all that, but for our purposes here, as Bowen's brigade, Martin's brigade is moving forward, Hazen decides, okay, we're going to move forward too. So they both hit each other as they're advancing. That's you know, all the accounts pretty much talk about that. And they meet somewhere out in here. Bowen is pushed back, or Martin is pushed back to this area. That uncovers the second line, of course, and of course the Washington artillery becomes the focal point, and the 41st Ohio and the 9th Indiana move forward, and we have the fighting around the Washington artillery. The Crescent Regiment comes to the rescue and counterattacks, and Bowen's brigade also will counterattack somewhat. They'll come in on the flank of Hazen's people, will drive them back. Suey Smith's brigade of Crittenden's division will come around the flank and face kind of more this direction than that direction, and as a result, then the Federals will have kind of a vortex. Their line will be something like that then, and so the Confederates up in that vortex will be caught something similar to how Hazen was caught in this one. Do you see how the brigades are aligning here? Interesting episode about Hazen himself as Hazen leads his troops. This is the famous Hazen, of course, the Hazen Monument at Stones River. As Hazen leads his troops, everything goes into chaos and they start retreating, and Hazen is still on his horse. And this is all in his memoirs. And he says, I'm not sure I could have jumped the fence, kind of like John Wayne, you know, and a fat old man was loaded down with iron and whatever. So he decides to go around the edge of the field as he goes back, and he gets lost. And he winds up actually over on McCook's front. and he says, I'll never be able to get back to where my brigade is. That sound familiar? Anybody ever gotten lost on the battlefield? No. Obviously, we've never done that. But he gets...
Only with a guide.
Only with a guide, yeah. He gets lost and can't find his way back to his brigade, so he has the bright idea. I will go back to the landing, and then I will come out the way we came out this morning. I'll know my way, I'll know the landmarks and so on. So the rest of the day, Hazen is gone. And by this time, Nelson comes along and says, where's Hazen? And they says, well, I don't know. We saw him in the attack, but we hadn't seen him since. And so they think, well, gosh, he's wounded or dead. And Nelson actually gives a $50 bounty for anybody that will go out and find his body and bring it in. And so these guys are going out and hunting for Hazen's body, you know. And of course, they never find it because he's over at McCook's position, lost. So there's you know, all that to kind of, there's a definite lack of, I think, leadership maybe in the Army of the Ohio, and I'm not anti-Army of the Ohio by any means, but if you look in the larger context, there was a study, Gerald Prokopowicz, anybody read All for the Regiment? And his argument is that the cohesiveness in the Army of the Ohio was regimental based, that the training that they received on the regimental and so on. And the larger ups, and we know the Crittenden's and the McCooks, now George Thomas is a little bit different, but Crittenden and McCook and Bull Nelson, he doesn't live long. But in this case, I think it's pretty vivid here that Crittenden is pretty much not involved out here. His other brigade, Boyle's brigade, is facing due west, while Smith's brigade, Suey Smith's brigade, comes in and aids Hazen here. So that whole division is kind of separated. Nelson spends most of his time over on the other flank with his favorite brigade commander, Jacob Ammen, and he's worried about that flank being turned by Chalmers and so on. So especially with Hazen being lost here, there's a severe vacuum of leadership here in this general area, and it really tells. McCook doesn't do a whole lot better. He stacks his brigades, kind of like Beauregard did, you know, the Corps, and doesn't really use the full potential of his division as he moves forward until much later on. So there's the only place that I see real activity and real let's go and so on is wherever Buell himself is at the moment. And Buell apparently is involved in this attack in the wheat field, probably as a result of Nelson's division getting enfiladed. We got to go do something about this. So wherever Buell is, there's energy and there's action, but everywhere else it doesn't seem to be quite the leadership that's needed. All right, we're going to follow this line on down the Hamburg-Purdy Road, and then we'll veer off and follow the Confederate line in dealing with Breckenridge's force. Brigade, of course, it's Martin's brigade now, Oval Tablet. 9th Arkansas, 10th Arkansas, 2nd Confederate. 1st Missouri will be a little bit detached. If you read their reports, and we can get the OR out, but not necessarily right now, but they get a little bit detached and do kind of their own thing for just a little bit. But you can tell we're facing that direction. And if we had a compass, no need to get it out or anything, but where we were on Hardy's line over there was facing that direction. Just so you see what I'm talking about? We're in the process here. And as we walk down Ruggles line, and this is, I guess many of you have already been in this area down Ruggles line if you walked in. I dare say most people that walk Ruggles line get to that tablet and those cannons and say, okay, well, this is in the Ruggles line, and they never come down and see Bowen's tablet, and you know, second day always gets short shrift and all that. So I bet a lot of people don't even come down here and see that. They just stop up there. But if you hadn't been down here, of course, you can see the extension of Ruggles line and so on. But in Ruggles line, that's not what we're here to see, but we'll see it as we go. We'll see Statham's tablet, and then across the road, the Corinth Road, and see Trabue and his position and all that. Now Breckenridge is a little bit different than Hardy. Hardy's conglomeration of units over there consisted of portions of Bragg's Corps, portions of Polk's Corps, portions of, well, not Breckenridge's Corps, very little of Hardy's Corps, but it's Hardy's command over there. He's got Jones Withers and Chalmers and some of the others over there. Throughout the morning, units keep coming to the front. For instance, over on Hardy's front, the great story about Preston Smith's brigade of, it's Bushrod Johnston's former brigade, but Johnston's wounded, of course. Preston Smith of Polk's Corps arrives late because Polk had taken, or Cheatham had taken, a lot of his units back to their bivouac site on April the 5th. which is way back behind where we started at Ed Shaw's this morning. You know, they went way back there. And they get them started the next morning. Polk actually goes back and tries to find them to bring them up, and Beauregard's wondering, where's Polk? Is he wounded? You know, he can't find Polk. And they move to the front, and they get kind of moving in this direction, and they get cut off by some of this thick stuff. You saw how thick this is coming in, and so the line gets kind of cut off, and at one point an officer comes along, Jones Withers actually, and says, no, you get in the line over here. And Cheatham winds up on the other end of the line down there with just a very small, minuscule part of his original command that he brought to the battlefield. And in his report, he's kind of irritated. You can read between the lines, and he says, the rest of my command was diverted by an officer who ranked them. You know, that any officer who runs around and just diverts troops and says, no, you come over here. All that to say this, Breckenridge's corps is probably the most sound contingent of the 4 corps in the Confederate Army at this point. And I make a big argument in the book about the Confederate Army on the second day is not nearly as dilapidated and disorganized, I think, as we sometimes think. We think everybody just woke up that morning and said, okay, let's go to the line. What regiment are you in? 1st Louisiana. Well, I'm in the 2nd Texas, and you know, but we'll fight alongside each other. Breckenridge's corps is complete. It's got all 3 of its brigades with most all of its regiments with its corps commander right in the center. And I think that's a lot of the reason that Beauregard will use it as the hammer on the second day to send it forward. I've got my most complete corps with my most, with my corps commander and most of the regiments there, and they're all in line together. So he's going to send them forward. Ironically, Hardee's corps is also almost complete. Shaver's brigade, Wood's brigade, and Claiborne's brigade will all fight just west of here, and we're going to see those as we move on. However, they're missing their corps commander. Where's Hardee? He's back over here. If Hardee had been there might have been, you know, a little more cohesion there, but they do fight together basically as a corps, which is better than their record, what? The day before. Hardee's corps doesn't fight as a group the day before. Does Breckenridge's corps fight as a corps the day before? No. The 2 divisions of Bragg's corps both fight together, not as the 2 divisions as a corps, but the divisions themselves fight together. For instance, Ruggles' division of Anderson, Pond, well, not Pond is marching around, he's there for a little bit, but Anderson, Gibson, and for a time Pond is all there. We'll see their position in just a little bit as well. On the other side, we've got Withers with most of Gladden's, portions of Gladden's, Chalmers, and Jackson over here. So most of the divisions will fight together as well. Now Bragg is over on the far left, and the corps commander's not there, and the divisions aren't together as a corps, but these are the same size divisions basically as Breckenridge's corps and Hardee's corps, 3 brigade corps. So my point is that the Confederate Army is actually probably more organized on the second day. Now that's not counting, you know, defectors that have you know, stragglers and so on. And it's also not counting a lot of these regiments that would be missing from individual brigades. Maybe a brigade is missing a regiment or something, and they would just file in the line. Some of you saw the 26th Alabama and the 5th Tennessee and so on as we pass those signs. Yes, there will be some disorganization in terms of that. But my argument is that the Confederate Army fights as a more cohesive unit actually on the second day than it does the first day. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily learned a lot the first day, and it's certainly not because they reorganized during the night. It just, I think, probably happens to be the way it fell. For instance, Bowen and Statham spend the night together, and they move forward, and just by sheer coincidence, Trebu's brigade, who had spent the night over in McDowell's camp, comes in, just happens to be right beside us. So that it's almost by accident that it happens, but it ultimately does happen. So it's kind of interesting looking at the organization of the Confederate Army here. We'll move on down the line. We may attack. Well, better not attack anybody, but we'll charge past the Boy Scouts.
You said Claiborne got decimated the day before, did he not?
He does, but
He does organize what he has left.
well, by the second day he'll have, I think he says, 800 men or so. By the end of the day, he has only 27, I think he says, or something like real 58 maybe is what it was. But starting today, he'll have upwards of 800 or so, which is still pretty respectable. That's as large as some brigades. For instance, Stevens' brigade, when it attacks the Hornet's Nest on the first day, doesn't have about 800 or 900 men. So they have a pretty respectable
start working on that.
group on the second day as well.
I got a question for you.
Okay.
Since we're going to walk down and those lines.
Yeah.
When they place these cannons here, did they try and get the same type cannon as each battery had as best they could, or was it what's up next on the stack at the landing they just brought and placed
No,
it?
if they have definitive ideas, they might try to. I've thought about the exact same thing when we passed Robertson's battery back there. I noticed on the sign, and of course I'd been dealing with this, but he had 4 Napoleons, and those were weird rifles up there, you know, nowhere near Napoleon. So I haven't seen anything in the record that they absolutely try to put the same type of weapon at the position they were at. I have seen that at other parts, however. Gettysburg tried actively to do that, to put the kind of guns that were there, and you know that's mainly for the sure enough expert. You know, the average family with mom and dad and 2.78 kids going on vacation isn't going to care whether it's a Napoleon or a weird rifle or a 6-pound field gun or what, you know. But for those who really are into artillery, and there are those that, you know, it makes a difference to them. But I don't think there's anything like that at Shiloh. All right, let's move on. Yeah, it looks like a telephone box or something.
Yeah.
Electrical box, yeah.
Go out there and see? I managed the telephone.
There used to be that maybe a house right here.
There is a marker right through there.
Yeah.
That's
First day.
either Shaver or Wood. That's first day Hornet's Nest attack marker down
Oh,
there.
on the road?
Well,
along
the
the
Eastern
road?
Corinth Road is just right out here, but it's Duncan Field is just right through there.
Okay.
That's part of that 1130 A.P. Stewart attack that portions of those brigades were brought in. This marker denotes Stanley's brigade, and I dare say it doesn't get many looks as Boy Scouts and everybody else is going by because it doesn't have a couple of cannons by. You know, obviously, it's not as important because there are no cannons by, and it's round too. You know, but it delineates the second position or the second day position of Statham's brigade. Bowen just to the right there, or Wood or Martin. Treybu will be a little bit farther on forward. It falls to Statham's brigade to do the fighting in Duncan Field. As Breckenridge finally sends his corps forward, we know Martin gets tangled up in that fighting around the wheat field out there. Statham will get tangled up in Duncan Field, and portions of his brigade. You can see it's a big brigade with all these Mississippi and Tennessee regiments and so on. Particularly to the left, we get engaged in Duncan Field, and you can see the field already out to the left out there. They will be facing Boyle's brigade of Crittenden's division, and also one of the 3 artillery batteries that Buell is able to bring along is Bartlett's Ohio battery. They'll be on the ridge behind what we know of as the Hornet's Nest, that tall ridge where W.H.L. Wallace's artillery is the day before. There's Richardson's battery and Welker's and Stone's battery. They'll be up on that tall ridge. Markers, monuments out there today. Here again, it's a little bit difficult to figure out which did the attacking first. Boyle's brigade will move forward, and this is almost due west. Remember I talked about Boyle is facing due west. Crittenden's other division, or the brigade, Smith's brigade, is facing almost due south, aiding Hazen in that fighting around the wheat field around 11 a.m. or so. So the fighting here is basically between Statham and Boyle alone. Statham has as his support Stanford's Mississippi battery. Boyle, of course, has Bartlett's battery. So there's quite a lot of fighting back and forth in here. I think my conclusion is that Boyle moves forward. In fact, he sends the 19th Ohio, I believe, out as skirmishers kind of into the field. Statham begins to move forward with the rest of the corps, with Bowen to his right and Treybu on his left. They make it basically out into the field and kind of stop because Bowen gets involved with everything over there, and your right flank is kind of heated up a little bit. And then Boyle will make his attack, but he'll have to fall back. So what you're beginning to see all down the line is that both sides are kind of meeting each other, both of them trying to advance. The Confederates aren't realizing that the Federals are coming out to get us. We're still thinking we're going to get them, so we're advancing. The Federals are thinking, okay, they're going to be defensive minded and they're just going to stay there till we attack them. So both sides are basically just running up against each other all up and down this line. It happened with Nelson in the Cerebell's cotton field. It's happening with Bowen and Hazen in the wheat field, and it's happening here, and it will happen with Trebu and the rest all down the line. What was it?
An old telephone box.
Old telephone
It's
box?
defunct.
Okay, all right. Maybe one ringing then.
But no. They just finished
Brigade, you noticed, I don't know if you noticed Burns batteries, we came by. This is even more organization in terms of Breckenridge's corps. Trebu's brigade has its original battery still with it, which is an anomaly for today. Statham didn't. Stanford's battery is attached to Stewart's brigade, but they're there nevertheless. Hudson's battery is not with Bowen either, but Trebu does have Burns battery still with it here. You get a vivid idea of the fighting here. You can see across the field. Now the first row of Illinois monuments is not interesting to us right now. Dealing with the second day, it is to you, of course, because that's 58th Illinois. That's first day stuff, though. That's Hornet's Nest stuff. That's Tom Swinney's brigade. The next set of monuments back, that Indiana monument over there. I believe that's the 6th Indiana, and then the 1st Ohio over here, and over up in the woods is the United States regulars, and then back behind is the 5th Kentucky. That is Lovell Rousseau's brigade, and that's McCook's division. And behind McCook is his next brigade that has arrived, Kirk's brigade, and then even behind that, coming in and arriving about noon or 1 o'clock or so, is Gibson's brigade. So McCook is still having his guys come forward. And at this point, though, Rousseau's brigade is the only one on line, and he will actually fight them one brigade at a time. He'll kind of leapfrog them as they need to be done that way. Now, a couple of interesting things here that is important. Number one, McCook's brigade here, Rousseau's brigade of McCook's division, is the linkage with Grant's Army of the Tennessee. From here on, just in the woods there on, you begin with Pugh's brigade of Herbert's division, some of McClernand's folks, some of Sherman's folks. They're all mismatched and so on. And then you get eventually Lew Wallace's division out there. So the weak point, and there's very little lateral communication until they absolutely have to. The weak point is kind of right here, and if the Confederates knew that, of course, obviously they don't, but if the Confederates knew that and could drive a wedge in here, which they actually try, it could have potentially done something. The other interesting thing here is that the fighting in this area in Trebu's brigade report is kind of wishy-washy, and you wonder what field's he talking about. He just talks about a field with a cabin in it and all that. You know, it kind of gets interesting a little bit. But we know he fought here, and a couple of his regiments, the 4th Kentucky, 4th Alabama, will be sent around kind of the left flank out there into the woods to flank. This is before the actual linkage occurs, to flank Rousseau's brigade, which is the right brigade of Buell's army. So they realize there's a gap there, and we're going to send them in to turn that. Anderson's brigade of Ruggles division, which is the next division in line, all 3 brigades are represented there. Anderson comes in and wants to help as well, so there's a pretty good bit of firepower in here as Trebu holds the line here, and they're fighting back and forth just the same as we saw elsewhere. They're both advancing, and they hit as they advance. But the real interesting fighting is that McClernand finally says, okay, we need some help in here, and Rousseau will send his reserve, which is the 5th Kentucky, into that gap. So we've got the 4th Kentucky moving in to flank that. The 5th Kentucky is coming in to plug that gap. So we've got Kentuckian on Kentuckian right out in the woods out here. And why Kentucky put their monument back over near their campsites, I don't know. That would have been the perfect place, to put a Kentucky monument where Kentuckians fought Kentuckians. But I'm not a Kentuckian, and they can do whatever they want to. So
people from
it's fine
Kentucky are not
with me.
happy with where it is.
Oh, the people in Kentucky are not happy with it. Well, and I know when they first put it up, it didn't stay too stable long, and they had to redo it and all that. So, any Kentuckians in here?
It would have been funny if the 5th Kentucky CS had been fighting.
Had been fighting over there. Yeah, exactly. Well, they're in their brigade fighting brigade, so that in and of itself is interesting. But actually fighting each other, we get Kentuckian and Kentuckian out there. This whole brother against brother type thing. But the point is, Breckenridge's corps is the only one that is solid. It's together, has all of its components. Maybe a little artillery's missing, but has its original commander. and Beauregard will send it forward, and the hope is that he will push through all of this and push the Federals into the landing. Of course, in his way is are components of Buell's army, and they're up on that ridge. You can kind of see the 2nd Iowa Monument, 7th Iowa Monument down lower in Duncan Field there. Boyle's brigade and Rousseau's brigade originally, it's not as high ground over here, but Boyle's brigade particularly will be on that higher ridge up on the top, and that'll be very difficult for Statham's people, particularly over there, to deal with. So Breckenridge is kind of the hammer. Doesn't quite work out. In fact, Breckenridge eventually is driven back. Statham's brigade particularly will kind of fall apart a little bit as this withdrawing through the field. Stanford's artillery will really have to take up the slack and pour canister into them to stop them. And this is also the place that we see the only Confederate reinforcements arrive, and that's the 47th Tennessee. It's like, what, 714 men or something like that arrive. Staff Officer Chisholm ushers them very quickly up to help stabilize Statham's line in the center there, and for a while they are stabilized there. But same thing on Breckenridge and Crittenden and McCook's front that we saw on Nelson and Hardee's front. Basically just nothing changes. It's stable. Neither side is able to drive each other back. Something has got to give. Something has got to provide one side or the other with leverage. And as we go farther on down the line, we'll see that it's not going to happen from here to Jones Field. It's going to be the same old story as we go on, and the leverage actually is going to come from a really unlikely spot. And we'll see that when we get on down the line. That's a battalion, 4th Alabama Battalion. They got a comma really in the wrong place, kind of.
They shouldn't be there. Okay.
Yeah.
Have they ever located Duncan's cabins? Or tried to?
Set basically where the Ross Monument is. That's why he had his headquarters there. And I assume you're thinking in terms of the 58th Illinois and 7th Illinois coming and flanking later in the day. We're talking when Anderson moves forward and some of the others, they will move forward and kind of turn and face that direction a little bit, but then they'll get driven back to their original position out there.
Some of the 58th guys hid under the cotton bales.
Oh, did they? I hadn't read that account, but yeah.
They had a sniper that he's buried up in the cemetery. And they discussed that, but they had, when the Confederates moved in, some of them they hid under the cotton.
Oh, really?
They were caught.
Yeah. I hadn't read that account, but yeah, by all accounts, that's where Wild Ross has his headquarters here. That's where the cabins were, and of course they're post-war house there. They're pictures of Ross's monument right there in front of the house, and so on. So, and you can always tell house sites by the big cedar trees like that. That just looks housey, of course. In the spring, you can always tell by the little yellow flowers that grow up where a house site used to be. Way out in the middle of the woods, you'll see, little yellow flowers planted, and that was
nice little rose.
Nice little rose, yeah. It was a house site. All right, let's move on.
Why is that? Why is it yellow?
Flowers in the yellow.
Okay. It's so straight in there.
He says, well, Colonel Traboo, and he says, let me see him. And Anderson says, I need portions of your brigade, and we'll go attack first. And Traboo says, okay, yes, we'll do that. And then he comes back and says, well, I don't think I should let them go. I need to be covering this battery, and so on. Anderson says, okay, well, whatever. But then Bragg comes in and actually detaches those two regiments and sends them in, and Anderson goes in and helps. So we're in the gap again between McCook's brigade, which is the right flank of Buell's army, and the Army of the Tennessee components on this flank, particularly Hurlbut's division, Hughes brigade. And there's quite a bit of fighting raging in this area, but it's all pretty much a stalemate, just like we've seen from the other end of the line down there, and it will continue to be so as we go on. Go find Gibson. Now, those of you that were here last year, remember when we made our little circular assault on down there? We actually came through this area a little farther to the west out there, but when we came back, we came right by these tablets. Y'all remember that? We were looking for Claiborne's second day position, which is right across the ravine out there, so we're basically following our footsteps there. This is Gibson's brigade, of course, 4th Louisiana, 13th Louisiana, 1st Arkansas, what's the other regiment? The 19th Louisiana, I believe. That's one of those that was in that second line at the Daniel Davis wheat field. I think I mentioned them actually beside the Crescent Regiment out there. And so there are some things split up. There are some brigades split up. But by and large, Gibson is here. These are the same folks, of course, that charged the Hornet's Nest 3 times, 4 times maybe. I fall on the 4th side time. 4-time side, but these are the same guys that assaulted the Hornet's Nest all that time yesterday. We've got Anderson and Gibson. Pond's brigade, we'll look at Pond a little bit later over at Jones Field. They do fall into line somewhat with these guys, and so for a little while they are a division, but Pond is later taken out of line, and they're the ones that are kind of humorous. They're taken out of line, they're marched over to Hardy's flank over there, and then they march back here, and then they march, they spend pretty much all day just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's to say only 3 regiments of that unit are, the Orleans Guard, the 16th and 18th Louisiana. The other 2, the Crescent Regiment and the, well, I believe the Crescent Regiment's with them. No, the Crescent's over here, the 38th Tennessee, I believe, is back with them. They'd been detached the day before as well. So that brigade kind of moves back and forth, and it's humorous reading some of their letters. You know, all we did was march on the second day, back and forth and back and forth. But they did stop and find a barrel of wet hardtack, I think, in one of the camps, and they devoured it with the gusto of a hound dog, as Jim Miner used to say. But Gibson's brigade is here, and we're going to cross the creek down there. The spring actually may be flowing this time. I think last time it wasn't flowing. We'll take a look at that, but then we'll cross over and head on to Jones Field. Brigade, and obviously what we're doing, we're just moving down the line of the second day Confederate position. Here's Claiborne. This will start Hardy's Corps, and next we'll have Shaver, and then next we'll have Wood. That'll be over at Jones Field, which you can already see the opening in the woods out there. Unfortunately, Hardy's not here. Hardy's on the extreme other flank, and had Hardy been here, of course, it would have been a little more organization, but he's not here. Actually, Ruggles and Polk are commanding in this area. Bragg will be a little farther on down at Jones Field. So we were here last year. We came basically just like we did right then back from Tillman Branch. Following Claiborne's brigade, the last thing on the first day was an attack against the 13th Iowa across Tillman Branch, and then we came back to here and then followed them back to the church. So let's move on to Jones Field. Field Stalemate. That's Girardi's Baptist tablet right behind us there. Of course, that's the rusted tablet that we saw across Wilkesville Branch earlier today. So from there to here, you know, just taking us a while to do it.
We're not taking the cannon.
We don't have cannon and horses and limbers and forges and all that kind of stuff, and not fighting our way through here. So they do quite a lot of moving. 5th Tennessee Shaver's brigade will be right up here, but again, we're just following the footsteps of Hardy's Corps. Bring in the Army of the Tennessee real quickly. I mentioned before that they don't fight quite as well as their Confederate counterparts that had fought the same amount the day before. And I think a lot of that is because they realize, all right, we've got a lot more support. We've got Lew Wallace here and Buell here, who supposedly are fresh. They're not fresh by any means. They have been booking it and marching like crazy to get here. Lew Wallace marched 16.8 miles the day before, which is not just an inordinate amount for Civil War soldiers, but that's, you know, you march 17 miles and you're gonna feel it. As a result, they kind of are slower in advancing than either Buell or Lew Wallace. We're going to talk about Lew Wallace in just a little bit. He crosses Tillman Branch by 8 o'clock or so, and there again took Nelson till a couple hours to get across Deal Branch. Took Lew Wallace 2.5 hours to get across Tillman Branch, and my thinking is if it took them 2.5 hours to get across with no opposition, hardly, how long would it have taken if the Confederates had resisted at Tillman or Deal Branch? But by 9 o'clock, Lew Wallace has moved into the western portions of Jones Field there, the northern and western portions. Buell has moved into the Wicker Field area and Cerebel Cotton Field area that we saw earlier. The action's starting to pick up out there. At the same time, the middle contingent under Sherman and McClernand and Hurlbut and those guys, they are lagging way behind. In fact, they don't cross Tillman Branch till about 10 o'clock or so. So they're going way behind. They're going a lot slower. If you read their accounts, Sherman says, I was waiting on the guns from Buell to my left to appear. And of course, Buell is not facing anybody hardly, so he's just moving right along. Lew Wallace says he gets into Jones Fields and he looks to his left and he sees absolutely nothing. So he's not moving forward. McClernand says he's stopped every little bit going through his camps, and he will deploy his artillery. McAllister's battery, Dresser's battery, I believe, is out here, and he would shell the woods in front. Nobody's out there, but he's going to shell the woods in front. These guys are gun shy. They're scared from the whipping they took yesterday, and they're not just beating down the bush to get out there and fight them again. So the middle section here is a little bit slower in coming to the front, and when they do, they will meet, of course, the components of Shaver and Claiborne and Gibson and so on in this kind of no man's land out here. And there is heavy fighting, back and forth fighting. Here again, it is very difficult to determine which side actually advances first, and probably it's kind of a combination. We do know there is a major attack out into Jones Field by Wood's brigade and Shaver's brigade at the same time. That will be repulsed. We'll talk about that as we move on forward. A Union advance, counter advance, is repulsed as well. In fact, they retreat all the way into the valley of Tillman Branch back in there before they finally come back. So the point is, all of this again is basic stalemate all along the line. The Confederates aren't able to move forward like they wanted to do, like Beauregard had planned to do, but they're absolutely stopping the Federal advance in its tracks here on this basically level ground. Since we left Chalmers' position over there at Johnson's death site, have we gone over much terrain at all? This little creek that we just crossed right here is about the only thing that we've even been across. Most of it's been flat land. If they could do that on flat land, what could they do behind some of these creeks here? So kind of interesting. Let's go on and see Shaver. We won't really stop and talk a lot there. We'll go on and look at this. Henry Morton Stanley, and as he gets out into the field and the Federals advance, they figure out, okay, this is no place for us, and they start falling back, and Henry Morton Stanley is captured in Jones Field here. And you know the rest of the story. He goes into Northern Prison Camp and they talk him into being a Yankee then, and he's one of these galvanized Yankees. And then he goes on, of course, to find Dr. Livingstone. And I am going to get out the official records here, and y'all can see my volume 10 of the OR has been good for them. You can see how I marked it up and all that. But I want to show you, if you've never seen it, Wood's report in here. Get over in the Hardee's. Sam Wood writes this big, long, elaborate report, and you can see he actually provides a map, which is kind of interesting for Shiloh. Not many do that for Shiloh. You get into Vicksburg and some of the engineering stuff, and they actually will. But it actually should be oriented like this, upside down. And you can see Wood's brigade. This is Jones Field here. Our line, Wood's brigade, and so on. Shaver will be on a little farther out. And what he's telling about is how these men move out in part of this combined Confederate attack. And they move out into Jones Field, but you see the enemy's battery down here. That's Thompson's battery. That's the Boughton's battery, I believe, with Lew Wallace's division. They take these guys in the flank, and they get out into that field. And Wood actually says, the enemy, as we advanced, unlimbered a battery to the left and waited until nearly 2/3 of the entire line was in the open ground. Then they opened, expecting that the left of the line, which was on the flank of the battery, would charge and take it. I continued to advance, and had nearly crossed the open field of the woods beyond, when the whole line to my left precipitously retired, falling back to the cover of the woods. I faced my command about and marched back, having reformed on the right of the same line, so and so, so and so. It's never your fault. I didn't ever fall back. I fell back because the people on the side of me fell back. There's just a little bit of woods. But I did want to show you that map. Now we're going to continue on into the woods here. The line will move on, trying to reach Owl Creek. And if you look at your map, you can tell we're at 312 right here. We're getting pretty close to the picnic area out there and these bluffs overlooking Owl Creek. The problem is we won't quite reach the valley of Owl Creek, and that's going to be the key. That's going to be the leverage that's needed to stop all of this stalemate that we've seen from one end of the battlefield to the other. So
We're going north, Tim?
I'm sorry, do what?
We're going north or west?
No, we're going kind of northwest.
Okay.
Yeah. Where's that compass we found? We should use it. The waterlogged compass.
What direction do you want it?
I don't know. We can make a circle if you want. Early in the morning, the first initial movements by Beauregard will be toward this flank, toward the left flank, because it's Pond's brigade that's farther forward on the lip of the ravine, Tillman Branch Ravine, that Lew Wallace will start dealing with like at 5:30 in the morning, right after daylight. Beauregard will hear that, so he'll start sending troops in this direction. Russell is one of the first ones to get here, and you can see he has the vast majority of his brigade here, the 12th and 13th Tennessee, 22nd Tennessee, I believe, maybe the 19th Louisiana is attached to this brigade. I forget, there's a Louisiana brigade or regiment attached to this brigade as well. They're fighting elsewhere. I think that is the 19th that's over at Wolf Field. At any rate, most of his brigade is here, and Russell will kind of take command of this flank. To begin with, there will be others that will come in. Of course, Cheatham will ultimately bring his forces around. We'll see that in just a second. Others, there's Zach Dees and portion of Gladden's brigade is out here, the 1st Louisiana and so on. They'll be the farthest on down the line, the actual flank. As others come in, as Cheatham comes in, he takes command of this flank. Then as Bragg comes up, he takes command of this flank. So it's a gradual progression. But early in the morning, it's Russell pretty much in command out here. And you can't really see it, but if you went out into Duncan Field, you'd see the Federal line. You can see the tablets a little bit. See those folks walking out there with the red on? That's a little bit farther is the Federal line. And they're using the reverse slopes, just like we saw at the Peach Orchard. They're using the reverse slopes of the hill in order to cover their artillery. And when this Confederate line, particularly Wood's brigade, goes out into that field, they're just absolutely raked in the flank, much like we saw McClung and Hodgson with the Washington artillery do at Davis Wheatfield and Cerebell Cottonfield. Russell will get the picture here that if I go out into that field, I'm going to have a pretty good problem. And Wood will actually talk about the left of his brigade doesn't go forward because Russell didn't go forward, and only a portion of Wood's brigade actually went out in the field. And there's a lot more detail than this, but we're following the line. Here again, though, the Federals aren't able to move forward, drive the Confederates back, but the Confederates aren't able to drive forward and move the Federals back. So it's stalemate here, all as it is everywhere else. Let's go look on down the end of the line.